Hello everyone, how are you all? As I have already informed you that I am going to make a series of English literature. In my series, I will discuss all important points, all important movements and authors and periods of English literature. As as all of us know that English literature is a vast literature, and this is not you can say confined only British literature. English literature consists American, African, Australian, and Indian and Canadian, etc. literature. All the works which have been written in English is considered as English literature. There are so many movements, so many theories, and so many practical concepts are there in the English literature. So I decided to make a series in which I will discuss all the points of English literature, all the important facts of English literature. I have already made a video of ancient literature. In that video, I discussed ancient literature and other many important authors and their work of ancient literature like Ovid, Homer, Virgil, etc. And this is my second sequel. In this video, I will discuss British literature. I will start from British literature, and the very most important author of British literature was Chaucer. So let's start our series of English literature. Geoffrey Chaucer. The time period of Geoffrey Chaucer was 1340 to 1400. He was born between 1340 or 1445, probably in London. His father was a prosperous wine merchant. It means the exact date of birth is still not known or unknown. In 1357, he was a page in the household of Elizabeth de Bourgh, Countess of Ulster, wife of Prince Leone. He was captured by the French during the Brittany expedition of 1359 but was ransomed by the king. Edward III later sent him to France on a diplomatic mission. He also travelled to Genoa and Florence. Around 1366, Chaucer married Philippa Roth, a lady in waiting in the queen's household. Philippa's sister, Catherine Seinfeld, later became the third wife of John of Gaunt. In 1374, Chaucer was appointed Comptroller of the lucrative London Customs. In 1386, he was elected Member of Parliament for Kent and also served as a Justice of Peace. And in 1389, he was made Clerk of the King's Work, overseeing royal building projects. He held a number of royal posts, serving both Edward III and his successor Richard II. Chaucer lived during reign of Edward III, which was 1327 to 1377, Richard II 1377 to 1399, and Henry IV 1399 to 1400. And he was the first poet to be buried in Westminster Abbey, also known as the Poets' Corner. Arnold called him father of English poetry. This is very important point. And in the Legend of Good Women, the 9 legends are Cleopatra, Thisbe, Dido, Hypsipyle, Medea, Lucre, Ariadne, Philomela, Phyllis, and Hypermestra. Dryden rewrote Canterbury Tales in modern English. He was the first national poet of England. Dryden said about him, Here is clothes plenty, and a rough diamond, and must be first polished, ere he shines. Boccaccio exercised a deep influence on Chaucer. It means Boccaccio had a great impact or influence on Chaucer. On diplomatic mission, he was sent to Italy, where he met Petrarch and Boccaccio. He makes a clear reference of Petrarch in his clerk tale. It means he was influenced by Petrarch and Boccaccio, and he wrote so many works in Italian, or you can say he used so many he used the writing style of Italian writing style in his Italian period. He is called father of English poetry or the grandfather of English novel. He is called morning star of song and morning star of Renaissance. Arnold says about him, Chaucer lacks not only the accent of Dante but also the high seriousness. He is the first one to use octava rhyme in the Book of Duchess. Octava rhyme is the 8-syllable line in couplet rhyming. So, in which work Chaucer used octava rhyme? The answer is the Book of the Duchess. And he used heroic couplet in The Legend of Good Woman. And in which work Chaucer used heroic couplet? The answer is The Legend of Good Woman. He first used rhyme royal in Troilus and Cressida. Rhyme royal is a 10-syllable line arranged in 7-line stanza. The rhyming scheme is AB AB BCC. Chaucer's Troilus and Cressida is called novel in verse. It means it is a novel which was written in verse. In the House of Fame, Chaucer resembles closeness to Dante's Divine Comedy. W.J. Long called the prologue to Canterbury Tale as the prologue to modern fiction because of its realism. The general prologue of the Canterbury Tales contain 858 lines. The great plan of Canterbury Tale is taken from Boccaccio Decameron. It means the plan of Canterbury Tale is taken from Boccaccio's Decameron. In Canterbury, the pilgrims could be seen going to Thomas Becket in the month of April. He gave pen picture of 21 pilgrims in his work. Pen picture means he described the 21 pilgrims in his work. Had Chaucer written in prose, it is possible his Troilus and Cressida and not Richardson Pamela would be celebrated as first English novel by S.D. Neil. S.D. Neil said that Troilus and Cressida would be considered as first English novel, not Richardson Pamela. Edmund Spenser, in his Fairy Queen, called Chaucer well of English undefiled. Neville Coghill interpreted Canterbury Tales in 20th century English. Albert called Chaucer the earliest of great moderns and the morning star of Renaissance. Dryden called Chaucer the father of English poetry. And by Lois, Chaucer found his native tongue a dialect and left it a language. Chaucer is the earliest of the great moderns. This line was said by Matthew Arnold. J.K. Chesterton said, if Chaucer is the father of English poetry, he is the grandfather of English novel. And Dryden said, here is the god Plenty. And Occleve wrote a famous poem, The Regiment of Prince, on the death of Chaucer. Chaucer and Langland died in the same year, which was 1400. Chaucer has been criticized for presenting about courts and cultivated classes and neglect the suffering of the poor. Although in Canterbury Tale 120 poems were planned but only 24 were completed. Chaucer introduced felicity in English. Longest tale of Canterbury Tale is Night Tales, and Chaucer has been called the Prince of Panegyrists. Chaucer was not in any sense a poet of the people. This line was said by Hudson. The work of his life can be divided into three periods: the, the French period, Italian period, and English period. So let's start with French period, which was from 1359 to 1372. During this period, Chaucer translated the Roman de la Rose. It is a French poem which was written in 1200. He also wrote his Book of Duchess, an elegiac poem that shared much with contemporary French poetry of the time, but also departed from that poetry in important ways. Chaucer's extensive reading of Latin poets such as Boethius also influenced his own work. Was influenced by French masters as Guillaume de Macquant, Jean de Meaux, and Guillaume de Loris. The first work of his French period was the Romaunt of the Rose, which was written in 1360. This book was almost a translated version of French work Le Roman de la Rose by Jean de Meaux and Guillaume de Loris. The story began with an allegorical dream in which narrator receives advice from the god of love on gaining his lady's favor. Her love being symbolized by rose, he is unable to get to the rose. स्टोरी शुरू होती है एक ड्रीम से, जहाँ पर नरेटर इन दिस ड्रीम नरेटर रिसीव एन एडवाइस फ्रॉम द गॉड ऑफ लव that he will be able to gain his lady's favor, and the lady is symbolized as a rose. The second fragment is a satire on the mores of the times with respect to courting, religious order, and religious hypocrisy. So second fragment is a satire. In the second fragment, the narrator is able to kiss the rose, but then the allegorical character jealousy build up fortress encircling it so that the narrator doesn't have to access to it. So in the second fragment is a satire, and in this fragment author is able to kiss the rose, but the allegorical character jealousy build a fortress around the rose. Then poet doesn't have access to the rose. So the third fragment of the translation takes up the poem 5000 lines after the second fragment's end. It means the third fragment starts after the 500 lines of second fragment. At its beginning, the god of love is planning to attack the fortress of jealousy with his barons. The rest of the fragment is a confession given by false semblant or false seeming, which is a treatise on the ways in which men are false to one another, especially the clergy to their parishioners. It means in the third fragment, the god of love attacked to the jealousy with his soldiers, and in this fragment, a confession is given by false semblant. False semblant means false seemingly. It represents that pupils became false to each other. Pupils appear false to each other. The third fragment ends with false semblant going to fortress of jealousy in the discourse of a religious pilgrim. He speaks with wicked tongue that is holding one of the gate of the fortress and convince him to repent his sin. The poem ends with Flensman absolving wicked tongue of his sin. So, this is the work, The Romaunt of the Rose. Then the Book of Duchess. Book of Duchess is a work which was written in 1369. The book was written on the death of the Duchess Blanche, who was the wife of John of Gaunt. It is an important point that why the Book of Duchess was written, or the Book of Duchess is dedicated to the Duchess on the death of Duchess Blanche, who was the wife of John of Gaunt. She belongs to Lancaster. This book is an elegy in nature. It comprises 1300 lines. In this book, Chaucer used octave rhyme for the first time. The Book of Duchess begins with a man who can't sleep. His heavy thoughts and fantasies are so disturbing that he hasn't slept for 8 years. He fears he will die of his insomnia, so he asks a servant to bring him a book to read, which he calls a romance, a medieval European genre of literature, often about knights and their adventures and romance. He says that it's better to read than to play chess to try to fall asleep. So, this story is about poet. One day, poet is unable to sleep and he wants to sleep. He hadn't slept for last 8 years, so he decided to sleep and he want to sleep. So he asked his servant to bring him a book so that he can read it or going to sleep. So he can going to sleep. So the book is about knights or adventure, or you can say romance. He reads about a fictional king, Sykes, who sets sail for an adventure at sea and is drowned in a storm. The Queen Eleonore The Queen Elcone waits for him to return, and when he doesn't, she grieves inconsolably. She begs the goddess Juno to let her see what happened to her husband, if only in a dream. She vows to give her total devotion to the goddess if she grant her wish. The goddess causes Elcone to fall into a deep sleep and summons Morphosis, the god of sleep, to go find the king on the ocean floor, inhabit his body, and make him appear to Elcone in a dream, so that she sees that he has drowned. He does so, and Elcone dies of grief 3 days later. The narrator, or the speaker of the poem, figures that if a god helps Elcone fall asleep and dream, maybe a god would do the same for him. He sent a plea up to God that he will reward them with the most luxurious gold-plated bedchamber, with a bed of the finest down, with covers embroidered with the finest thread of pure gold, if they will help him sleep. He immediately fell asleep and had a vivid dream. First, the narrator heard the birds singing the sweetest symphony he ever heard. He is lying in a room whose walls have pictures of all the characters of great European epic poems. For the entire story of Troy was wrought in the glasswork of thus. यानी कि तो बुक ऑफ डचेस है, इसमें क्या होता है, नरेटर को नींद नहीं आती है, वह 8 साल से अच्छे से नहीं सोया है। उसे डर है कि कहीं वो इनसोम्निया के कारण उसकी डेथ ना हो जाए, इसलिए वह अपने सर्वेंट को कहता है कि वह कोई बुक लेकर आए। तो उसका सर्वेंट एक बुक लेके आता है। द बुक इज़ अबाउट द एडवेंचर ऑफ नाइट्स एंड इट्स ऑल्सो अबाउट अ रोमांस। तो एक बुक लेके आता है साइनिक्स के एक राजा की, जो कि लड़ाई करने के लिए नदी पार करके जाता है, लेकिन वापस नहीं आ पाता और ना ही उसको कोई न्यूज़ आती है। और उसकी जो वाइफ है एल्कोइनी, उसको लगता है कि उसका हस्बैंड जो है वो मर चुका है। तो वह गॉड ऑफ स्लीप से रिक्वेस्ट करती है कि वह दिखाए कि उसके हस्बैंड कहाँ पर है, राजा कहाँ पर है। तो अगर वह ऐसा करते हैं, अगर गॉड ऐसा करते हैं, तो वह उसकी प्रे करेगी, उसके लिए मतलब उसको अपने आप को डेडिकेट कर देगी उस गॉडेस के लिए। उसके बाद जो मॉर्फिस है, जो कि गॉड ऑफ स्लीप है, वो मतलब जो गॉड है वो गॉड ऑफ स्लीप को कहते हैं कि एल्कोनी को जो है वो सुला दे और उसको दिखाएं कि उसके हस्बैंड कहाँ पर है। ऐसे ही वो किताब ख़त्म हो जाती है। तो नरेटर भी क्या करता है कि प्रे करता है गॉड से कि अगर द गॉड विल हेल्प हिम टू फॉल asleep, then he will make a good temple full of gold plated bed chambers, flowers, and all walls are decorated with beautiful flowers। यानी कि वह उसको कहता है कि इसी तरीके से वह गॉड के लिए करेगा। उसके बाद वह सो जाता है और सोने के बाद उसे एक सपना आता है, जिस सपने के अंदर वह देखता है कि वह एक टेम्पल के अंदर है, जिसके सारे के सारे दीवार जो है वो यूरोपियन एपिक पोएम्स के कैरेक्टर्स से जो है वो भरे हुए हैं। Then some of other works of this period are ABC. It is written in 8-line stanza. The Complaint into Pity. Chaucer has has used first time a 7-line stanza poem as rhyme royal in this work, The Complaint of Mars and Queen Annelita. Then, the second period is Italian period. This period is between 1372 to 1385. In 1372, Chaucer has been to Italy and came in personal contact with Dante, Petrarch, and Boccaccio, and all of these had influenced on Chaucer. The important work of this period are Chaucer and Cresside, The Parliament of Fools, The House of Fame, and The Legend of Good Women. The first work is Chaucer and Cresside, JCT. It is a tragic verse romance by Chaucer, composed in 1380 and considered by some critics to be his finest work. The plot of this 8,239-line poem was taken largely from Giovanni Boccaccio Filastrato. It means this work is influenced by Giovanni Boccaccio's work Filastrato. It recounts the love story of Chaucer, the son of Trojan king Priam, and Cresside, widowed daughter of the deserter priest Calchas. The poem moves in luxury, fashion, with introspection and much of what would now be called psychological insight dominating many sections. Aided by Cresside's uncle Pandarus, Chaucer and Cresside are united in love after halfway through the poem. And then she sent to join her father in the Greek camp outside Troy. यानी कि यह जो एक लव स्टोरी है ट्योलस एंड क्रिसाइड के बीच में. जो ट्योलस और क्रिसाइड है वो हाफ ऑफ द पोएम एक दूसरे से प्यार करते हैं. उसके बाद जो क्रिसाइड है जो कि लेडीज़ है वो अपने अंकल के साथ जो है वो एक लड़ाई में चली जाती है. लेकिन वह ये प्रॉमिस करके जाती है कि वह किसी और से प्यार नहीं करेगी, लेकिन वहाँ जाके उसे किसी और से प्यार हो जाता है. तो जो ट्योरस है वो क्या हो जाता है, बहुत ज़्यादा दुखी हो जाता है और ट्रोजन वार में मारा जाता है. दिस इवेंट आर इंटरस्पाइड विद Boethian discussion of free will and determinism and the direct comment of the narrator. At the end of the poem, when Chaucer's soul rises into the heaven, the folly of complete immersion, sexual love is contrasted with the eternal love of God. तो ये स्टोरी है Chaucer and Cresside की. Then the Parliament of Fools. This work was written in 1382. It is a poem of 399 lines. Rhyme royal is used in this work. And this work is was written in 1380 to 90, and it was composed in the tradition of French Romance. This poem has been called one of the best occasional verses in English language. Often thought to commemorate the marriage of Richard III to Anne of Bohemia in 1382, it describes a conference of birds that meet to choose their mates on St. Valentine's Day. So this work commemorates the marriage of Richard II to Anne of Bohemia. And in this work, the poet discussed that there is a parliament of fools or birds, and in this parliament, it has been decided that every bird can choose their mate. That every male bird is free to choose their mate. So there is a eagle, there is a female eagle, and 3 male eagle like him. So 3 of them like the same eagle. And all of this moment was going on Valentine's Day. Sorry. Then the narrator fall asleep and dream of a beautiful garden in which nature presides over a debate between 3 high-ranking eagles, all aiming for the attention of beautiful female. The other birds, each of which represent a different aspect of English society, are given a chance to express their opinion. यानी अगर अलग अलग बर्ड से पूछा गया कि एक ही फीमेल को 3 अगर ईगल्स मतलब उसके साथ रहना चाहती हैं या शादी करना चाहते हैं तो अलग अलग बर्ड्स क्या ओपिनियन देते हैं. तो उनके ओपिनियंस को मतलब रिप्रेजेंट किया गया इंग्लिश सोसाइटी के जैसा. Although the debate on love and marriage is never resolved, the poem is complete in itself. So this is the Parliament of Fools. Then the House of Fame. This work was written after the influence of Dante. It has the resemblance of Dante's Divine Comedy. It is an unfinished poem by Chaucer, and this book contained 2,159 lines of octosyllable. After the prologue on dreams and invocation to the god of sleep, Book 1 says the poet fell asleep and dreamed that he was in a temple of glass where he was depicted Aeneas and Dido. The dream moves on to deal more briefly with other parts of Aeneid. द पोइट सी एन ईगल, मतलब इसमें क्या होता है कि वो एक ड्रीम देख रहा है. उस ड्रीम में पोइट जो है वो एक ईगल को देखता है दैट अलाइट्स बाय हिम एंड हिज गाइड थ्रू द हाउस ऑफ फेम, जो कि उसको गाइड करता है हाउस ऑफ फेम की तरफ. तो जो ईगल है वो उसको साइको फिलोसफिकल चीज़ें बताता है और किस तरीके से फेम काम करता है वो उसे बताता है. द ईगल डिपार्ट्स एंड चोसर एंटर द प्लेस ऑफ फेम. ईगल उसे उस प्लेस ऑफ फेम में छोड़ के चला जाता है जहाँ पर वह जो चोसर है वो ये जो है फिर जो पोएट है वो देखता है फेमस, ही सी द फेमस ऑफ बोथ क्लासिकल एंड बिब्लिकल लॉर. ठीक है, जो भी लोग फेमस हैं क्लासिकल और बिब्लिकल कहानियों में उनको वह देखता है देखता है सॉरी. Eloise blows a tramp to summon up the various celebrities who introduce themselves in categories reminiscent of the soul in Dante's Divine Comedian. उसके बाद एक जो है वो मतलब एक साउंड होती है और बहुत सारे सेलिब्रिटीज़ वहाँ पे इकट्ठा हो जाते हैं. तो ये हाउस ऑफ फेम है, यानी कि वहाँ पर जो जितने भी सेलिब्रिटीज़ हैं वहाँ पर उन लोगों को वो देखता है. देन द लीजेंड ऑफ गुड वुमेन. This work was written in 1385 and in this work it is written in Queen Bohemia's bidding, who asked him to write of good women. Much of poem is devoted to the first use of heroic couplet by Chaucer to retell in lyrical form the tragic love stories of Cleopatra, Thisbe, Tito, Hypsipyle, Medea, Eucry, Ariadne, Philomela, Phyllis and Hypermestria. मतलब लीजेंड ऑफ वुमेन में वह 9 लीजेंड के बारे में डिस्कस करता है. ठीक है, और यह एक ड्रीम वर्जन है जो चौसरी द्वारा 4th और फाइनल वर्क है. ठीक है, और इसमें जो ऑथर है प्रोलॉग के अंदर तक जो मतलब इस पोएम का जो प्रोलॉग है, तो जो गॉड ऑफ लव है वो एंग्री हो जाते हैं चौसर से क्योंकि उसने बहुत सारी वुमेन्स के बारे में लिखा है जो कि बिट्राई में जो कि आदमियों को धोखा देते हैं. ठीक है, चौसर तो इसके तो जब गॉड ऑफ लव नाराज़ हो जाते हैं तो उसको इंस्ट्रक्ट किया जाता है कि वह गुड वुमेन के बारे में लिखे. उन्होंने बैड वुमेन के बारे में लिखा है प्रोलॉग में, तो उसको इंस्ट्रक्ट किया जाता है कि वह गुड वुमेन के बारे में लिखें. तो जो प्रोलॉग है वह नोटवर्दी है फॉर द डिलाइटफुल ह्यूमर ऑफ द नरेटर, सेल्फ मोकरी फॉर द पैसेज इन प्रेज ऑफ बुक्स एंड ऑफ स्प्रिंग. उसके बाद जो है वह जो स्टोरी लिखता है उसमें वह लिखता है कि किस तरीके से आदमी औरत को बिट्रॉय करते हैं. तो दिस इज द सेकेंड पीरियड विच वॉज इटालियन पीरियड. नाउ द थर्ड पीरियड ऑफ चौसर वॉज इंग्लिश पीरियड. द ड्यूरेशन ऑफ इंग्लिश पीरियड वॉज 1386 to 1400 and the famous work of this period is Canterbury Tale, which was written after the influence of Boccaccio's The Decameron. The Canterbury Tales contain 17,000 lines. In the Canterbury Tales, 32 characters make the trip to the shrine of Mater St. Thomas Becket in Canterbury. Although 29 characters are mentioned in line 24 of the general prologue, the narrator joins this group making 30. It means there are 29 characters and the 30th character was author. The host, Harry Bailey, makes 31. The canon's yeoman who joins the group later makes it 32. The narrator gives a description of 27 pilgrims except second nun or nun's priest. This work remained unfinished at Chaucer's death. In prologue to Canterbury Tales, Chaucer employed the heroic couplet. There are 4 characters that are criticized or satirized by Chaucer in the Canterbury Tale. It means in Canterbury Tale, Chaucer ने क्रिटिसाइज्ड किया है. चौसर क्रिटिसाइज्ड 4 कैरेक्टर हु वाज knight, parson, clerk and plowman. Clergymen in Canterbury Tales are prioress, parson, fairy and monk. Canterbury Tales have the characters from 3 social groups or estate, nobility, church and commoners. Opinion of Chaucer about different character of Canterbury Tale. First plowman. He would help the poor for the love of Christ and never take a penny. About plowman, Chaucer say he would pay his tax regularly. So, Chaucer depicted plowman as a good character. Then host. He is bold in his speech, he is wise and full of tact. No manly attribute he lacked, merry-hearted man. Then doctor, physician, he was rather close to expenses and kept the gold he won in priest Gold stimulated the heart, or so we are told, had a special love for gold. So doctor loves God. Reeve. He was under contract to spend the accounts. Right from his master's earliest years, no one ever caught him in arrears. It means he was a bad man and he always betrayed his master. Then Miller, a wrangler or buffoon who had a store of tavern stories. Fleethy in the main was a master hand in stealing grain. Then Sumner loved garlic, onion, leeks, and drinking strong wine until he was lazy. Then he would shout and gabber as if crazy and wouldn't speak a word except in London when he was drunk. So Chaucer expressed his opinion about these characters. Then Franklin, his house was merry, never short of baked meat, piece of fish, and flesh, and these in such supplies it positively snowed with meat and drink and all the dainties and that a man could think. Then Clerk of Oxford, his horse was thinner than a rake, and he was too fat, but had a hollow look, a sober stare. He tread upon his overcoat was bare. Farrier. Know the taverns well in every town, and every innkeeper and barmaid too. Better than lepers, beggars, and the crew kept its tip stuffed with pins, focals, and pocket knives to give it to pretty girls. Then merchant had set his wits to work. None knew he was in debt. Debt was so stately in negotiation, loan, bargain, and commercial obligation. Wife of Bath liked to laugh and chat and knew the remedies of love's mischances, an art in which she knew the oldest dance. Then Cook had an ulcer on his knee, as for blank manage he made it with the best. Then the character of Canterbury Tale, the first character was Knight. Knight was a courtly medieval fighting man who has served king and religion all over the known world. Modest in dress and speech, though the highest in rank of the pilgrims to Canterbury, he rides with only his son and a yeoman in attendance. So he was a courtly medieval fighting man. He was modest in his dress and in speech, and always rides with his son. Then the squire, he is knight's son, a young man of 20 years. His age was 20 years, and he has fought several battles. Like his father, he is full of knightly courtesy, but he also enjoys a good time. Then the yeoman, he is knight's attendant. Third character was yeoman. He is knight attendant, a forester who takes excellent care of his gear. He wears a St. Christopher medal on his breast. He doesn't tell a story. So yeoman doesn't tell any story. The prioress, Madam Eglinton, who travelled with another nun and 3 priests as her attendants to the shrine of St. Thomas Becket at Canterbury. A woman of conscience and sympathy, she wears a curious brooch on which appears the ambitious statement in Latin, Love conquers all. Then the second nun, she accompanies the prioress, the nun's priest, his name is John. The monk, he is fat hedonist who performed to be out of his cloister, no lover of books and learning, he preferred to hunt and eat. So he was totally opposite as the model of monk. Then farrier. The farrier name is Hubert. He is merry champ who knows barmaids better than the sick. Having the reputation of being the best beggar in his house, he appears to be a venal, worldly man. Farrier means bhikhari, beggar. The merchant. The merchant is a tight-lipped man of business, unhappily married. He tells a story of the evils of marriage between old men and young women. The clerk of Oxford is a serious young scholar who heeds philosophy and prefers books than worldly pleasure. The sergeant of law. The sergeant of law is a busy man who seems busier than he really is. He makes a great show of his learning, citing cases all the way back to William the Conqueror. The Franklin. The Franklin is a rich landlord who loves to eat and keeps a ready table of dainties. He has been sheriff of his county. The haberdasher, the carpenter, the weaver, the dryer, the tapestry maker. The cook. The name of cook is Roser, who was hired by the master workman to serve them during their journey. He is rockling fellow, pleased by the bawdy tales of Miller and Reeve. He insists on telling a bawdy story of his own, one left unfinished. Then the shipman. Shipman is the captain of Modigliani of Dartmouth. He is a good skipper and a smuggler. The doctor of psychic. The doctor of psychic is a materialistic man greatly interested in money. He knows all the great medical authorities as well as his astrology, though he seldom reads the Bible. The wife of Bath. The wife of Bath. The name of wife of Bath is Alice, a cloth maker and 5 times a widow. Apparently wealthy from her marriages, he has travelled a great deal, including 3 trips to Jerusalem. She was well versed in her marriage and lovemaking. Her theory is that the woman must dominate in marriage. To make her point, she tells a tale of loathsome lady who, when her husband is obedient, becomes fair. The parson. Parson is a poor but loyal churchman who teaches his parishioners by his good example. He is a royal churchman. Refusing to tell an idle tale to his fellow pilgrims, he tells what he terms a merry tale about the 7 deadly sins. So, who tells the story of 7 deadly sins? The parson. The plowman is an honest man, the parson's brother. He tells no tale. The miller. The miller is a jolly drunken reveller who leads the company playing on the bagpipes. The reeve. The reeve is a slender, choleric man named Oswald. The manciple is an uneducated man who is shrewd enough to steal a great deal from the learned lawyer who hired him to look after his establishment. The sumner is lecherous drunken fellow who loves food and strong drink. The pardoner is a womanish man with long blonde hair. Harry Bailey is the host of Tabard Inn in Southwark. He organized the storytelling among the pilgrims, with the winner to have a meal at his fellow's cost upon the company's return. He is a natural leader, as his words and action shows. Then Chaucer. Chaucer is the author who puts himself into his poem as a retiring, mild-mannered person. The canon is a traveller who joined the pilgrim briefly on the road to Canterbury. So the canon joined the pilgrim between the travelling. He leaves when it is hinted that he is cheating alchemist. The canon's yeomen remain with the pilgrim company and tell an anecdote about an alchemist, a canon like his master who swindles a priest. Then let's start with the stories of the distant stories. So there are many stories of a Canterbury Tale. Just take a look of these stories. This is the night story. Then the second story is Miller Tale. The story is about a foolish carpenter whose name was John and his beautiful wife Elysian. There is also a character Nicholas in the story. So the story revolves around three characters: John, Elysian, and Nicholas. Then the third story is the Reeve story. Reeve tells the story of two students, John and Ellen. The story is about the story of the students. Then the cook's prologue and tale. The cook's name is Roser. Then the prologue and the tale of man of law. The story is about Muslim Sultan of Syria. Then the sixth story is Wife of Baths, prologue and tale. Then the Fairies prologue and tale. The name of farrier is Hubert. Then the Sumner's prologue and tale. Nine stories Clerk's prologue and tale. Merchant's prologue and tale. The story is about an old knight named January and his beautiful wife May. Squee's prologue and tale. 11 stories Squee's prologue and tale. Then Franklin's prologue and tale. The 13th story is the physician's prologue and tale. 14th story is Pardoner's prologue and tale. 15th story is Shipman's tale. Then Prior's prologue and tale. The prologue and the tale of Chaucer. Chaucer also tells a story. Then the tale of Melibee. This is the second tale of Chaucer, and it is a prose story of Melibee. Then Monk's prologue and tale. Nun's priest tale and prologue. And the theme of this tale is never trust flatterer. Second nun's tale and prologue. Canon's yeoman tale. The Mancipal tale and prologue. Parson's tale. So this is all about the important tales of Canterbury Tales, the work of Geoffrey Chaucer. So this is all about the important points, the important notes and some important facts of Chaucer.